Over the years, over the last many decades, we've seen that the world used to be a bipolar world in terms of two major superpowers, the Soviet Union, the Soviet Republic, the USSR, and the United States of America. But post the Cold War, the world shifted towards a more unipolar world. But then we've seen the sudden rise of other countries, China, for instance. India is another, case and example. And, Russia is also is challenging that status quo more and more. BRICS, basically, the intuition behind BRICS was these emerging countries coming together and trying to somewhat challenge the hegemony that was, instituted by traditional Western powers or leading advanced economies that you mentioned. Why would Pakistan apply for BRICS membership? So BRICS is, with the inclusion of an additional six countries, is fast evolving as a powerhouse. If Pakistan gets approved of the membership, it does signal the fact that Pakistan is not internationally isolated. So Pakistan, despite the fact that it has a faltering economy, it hasn't been doing so well. It has been on the verge of default. Still, politically is very much ingrained. China, they look at or they perceive BRICS as an entity which can sort of rival the US. India may not necessarily view it that way. For India, it's more like, it's a platform where they can liaise with China, keep China in check or, ensure that there's cordial relationships.
Hello and Assalamu alaikum. This is Rammal Hashmi and welcome to another episode of the New Wave Global. I have with me today Nauraiz Rana, who is going to assist me in our discussion related to BRICS. So Ahmed is an economist and is currently consulting with the World Bank, and he especially focuses on trade, investment, and competition. Before we start the discussion, I just want to give a brief overview of a historical overview of what BRICS is. So it stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And I will let Nauraiz get into the details, but just as a brief historical overview, originally coined as BRIC in 2001 by Goldman Sachs chief economist Jim O'Neill, this group expanded its horizons in 2010 to include South Africa, which eventually formed BRICS. And so it was born out of a desire to challenge the established world order, which was dominated particularly by US and its Western allies. And we see that it sort of evolved into a platform for major emerging economies. And against this backdrop, we also see that Pakistan, in its most recent development, Pakistan has formally sought BRICS membership, which obviously raises pertinent questions about, its implications, its challenges, and what the global broader landscape will look like. So, Nauraiz, over to you. How do you think that this informal coalition has evolved since its inception, and what motivated these nations to band together in the first place?
Hi, Ramal. Thank you for setting the stage and for the historical background on what BRICS is. And just to expand on it a bit further, over the years, over the last many decades, we've seen that the world used to be a bipolar world in terms of two major superpowers, the Soviet Union, the Soviet Republic, the USSR, and the United States of America. But post the Cold War and, the Soviet broke up, the world shifted towards a more unipolar world. And when I say unipolar, it was more in terms of economic strength. And when you have economic strength, you tend to have military strength, you tend to have global political strength as well. And US was the one asserting their geopolitical power and prowess over various other countries in the world, shaping how global policy is formulated, what is happening in various parts. But then we've seen the sudden rise of other countries, China, for instance. India is another, case and example. And, Russia is also is challenging that status quo more and more. So in order to, BRICS, basically the intuition behind BRICS was these emerging countries coming together and trying to somewhat challenge the hegemony that was, instituted by traditional Western powers or leading advanced economies that you mentioned. So there are various Western tools. There still is. There's the World Bank. There's the IMFs, which are though they are global institutions, but they are associated with aligning more with the interests of Western economies. So China came up with its the Asian Investment Development Bank. Then there was the ADB itself, the Asian Development Bank, so on and so forth. And BRICS is less formal compared to these institutions, but intuitively it represents the same order. India wants to vouch for a more multipolar world where power is shared with the global south as well, with countries or emerging economies categorized as the global south. And these countries came together to formulate uh, policies where they could instill development finance, where they could invest in infrastructure, where they can create somewhat of a new financial model to work on with, you know, if some economists tend to say that in the long term, they might, challenge the US dollar as well. If countries who have this amount of stature can challenge the trading practices that are traditionally practiced in the realms of international trade. And, we cannot take that very lightly because the BRICS, as it is, currently there are five nations who are part of the BRICS, as you just mentioned. They have 42% of the global population. They contribute up to, I think about 16 to 18% of global trade. And more so, they also contribute up to 27% of global GDP. So there's a lot of money in circulation and there's a lot that they contribute to. And, like I initially mentioned, we have China, we have India, we have Russia. Now South Africa is a part of it. If they start trading with each other within their local economies or regional currencies or whatever I was looking for, then it can somewhat challenge the US dollar and what it has been able to establish over the years. Now, more and more countries are joining in effective January 1st. Argentina is going to be part of BRICS. Then there's going to be Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. So now what we see is that BRICS is transcending from from an economic powerhouse to something which is more geopolitical nature, geopolitical in nature as well. Because when you have countries like Saudi and Iran on the same platform, on the same board, and China and countries like Russia mediating their relationships, then it also tends to kind of circumvent the Western established division that have been created, centuries ago and which are still fairly profound. So there's a lot to play and there's a lot to benefit for the countries that are participating.
Right. Definitely, but let's also not forget that the countries that we're talking about right now, they're emerging economies, and like you said, their contribution to GDP is considerable. But I'm more interested in why, given the recent announcement of Pakistan wanting to Pakistan formally expressed that it wanted to join BRICS, and naturally it raises a lot of intriguing questions because why does and how does Pakistan envision its role within BRICS, and what benefits do you think that it could anticipate? Because particularly in terms of, let's say, international cooperation, given its geopolitical position, or development finance and trade, because we can't ignore the complicated geopolitical landscape that it has, and the challenges that it continues to face, especially given the historical opposition that it has, faced with India, and there is a potential roadblock that it can cause. So there's general skepticism with regards to effective, tangible benefits that Pakistan can eventually receive. So what do you think that BRICS means for Pakistan?
So actually, it's a very interesting question, and I have a somewhat of, I would say, more of an interesting take on that. So let me break that into two different halves. So the first thing is, why would Pakistan apply for BRICS membership? So BRICS is, with the inclusion of an additional six countries, is fast evolving as a powerhouse, that tends to challenge other blocks like the G7, for instance, which is, categorized by Western leading economies. Secondly, if Pakistan gets approved of the membership, it does signal the fact that Pakistan is not internationally isolated. So Pakistan, despite the fact that it has a faltering economy, it hasn't been doing so well. It has been on the verge of default. Still, politically, is very much ingrained. And to be honest, it is, because we have two key allies. Pakistan is hoping that Moscow will fight the case for Pakistan on the BRICS table. China is a very close ally, is a decades historically is Pakistan's oldest ally, and still is in terms of way, and it manifests in various ways and shapes. But then if we look at the economic terms, if, for instance, Pakistan, virtue of being part of BRICS, does not need to trade in US currency, then that's an added advantage. And countries like Iran, for example, also stand to benefit from the same from the same objective. That they can circumvent being part of global trade without having to hold US foreign reserves. Then countries who don't have that foreign reserves, are they have greater leeway. So that is one. But the other thing is that when you see these trading blocks evolving, only countries stand to benefit from them who are able to capitalize on, their exporting capabilities. So you can't say that if there are, let's say, no tariffs, assuming there are no tariffs for countries that are part of BRICS and they can trade freely with one another, then Pakistan would again end up importing way more than they would be exporting because we don't have those productive capabilities. So the first step is that we need to create those capabilities internally in-house in order to capitalize the benefits and the opportunities that these country organizations tend to offer. Otherwise, there'll always be that power imbalance where countries who are more economically established would tend to feed off and exploit advantages from countries who are weaker. That's one thing. But then the very important question stands that whether Pakistan would, get that membership, because Pakistan and India, other than not talking about BRICS, the only organization that they're part of, intercountry organization, is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. And they both became members in 2017, and no one needed the permission of the other to become a member. But this time around, BRICS is much more complicated. That it has to be the acceptance has to be unanimous from all countries who are members of the BRICS. So it's tricky to see how that would evolve. But there are advantages that Pakistan can reap, obviously, in terms of trade. But then there's no magic to it. Just being a member is not going to reap much for Pakistan, like you said, in terms of tangible benefits.
That's interesting because, and like you mentioned earlier, we're talking about, over 40 countries have, beyond Pakistan, we're seeing that over 40 countries have expressed their desire to join BRICS, and they're all developing nations. And the recent expansions that you mentioned from Argentina to Saudi Arabia, we're seeing a lot of developing nations, and I feel that that's going to have a lot of implications for the dynamics of BRICS itself, and so what do you think that the inclusion of all these different members would impact the dynamics within BRICS? Because again, we see certain roadblocks from India towards Pakistan, and then there are other nations that have counterproductive sort of challenges. So how do you think BRICS can navigate these challenges with 40 new members? And what implications would that have on, let's say, both economic and strategic fronts?
So if you look at BRICS, the objectives of the overarching objectives, the very conspicuous, clearly defined objectives of BRICS is that they want to create a financial system. They want to, maximize infrastructural development, sustainable finance, sustainable development within their own countries. But then there are some more implicit objectives that vary from one country to the other. Let's talk about China and Russia. For China, they look at or they perceive BRICS as an entity which can sort of rival the US, the US-led organizations or the US economic power or the US geopolitical power, all across the world. India may not necessarily view it that way. For India, it's more like, it's a platform where they can liaise with China, keep China in check or, ensure that there's cordial relationships. Secondly, for them, like I said, they look at creating a more multipolar world where power is more equally shared. So they don't look at it as an anti-US entity, but more of, a neutral entity, which, that counters overall, brings over the balance that has existed between the North and the South. And other countries, they would have, and necessarily, I'm pretty sure they would have their own implicit objectives as well. How Iran would look at and leverage BRICS would be different than how Argentina would look at it and leverage it. Ethiopia, is very gifted in terms of natural resources. It would look to leverage BRICS in an entirely different manner. So for Pakistan again, it really matters. China having Pakistan on BRICS gives another seat to China because it's not about just countering the traditional Western powers. It's also about who leads the policy making dynamics within BRICS. So while there are 11 countries now, there'll always be an ongoing and active dialogue between them on how to further define the trajectory on how BRICS evolves. And the more strategic partners you have, the more power you can hold within on the BRICS table as well. And these benefits will some of these benefits between countries will overlap these objectives. At some, they will collide head on. And so these are, I mean, tricky waters to navigate. It's not going to be easy for any country, but in the end, I guess it's a step in the right direction as long as it tends to balance out economic, financial, and development power more in a more neutral manner overall. Because a unipolar world is good for no one. Neither is a bipolar world, so we need multipolarity, and I think it's economically it's conducive for at least countries who are part of it.
Definitely, and I think balancing regional interests and, like you said, steering through the changing global order, that still emerges as one of the critical themes in this narrative. And so I think when we talk about BRICS, the potential to reshape the global order, I do think that the influence is likely to grow, but the nations part of it, I would feel that they're more inclined to offer certain incremental economic and diplomatic alternatives rather than a complete replacement of the existing global order. That we do see that it continues to be in many ways unipolar and inclined towards the US. And yes, many countries they've aspired to join this group, but overcoming internal divisions is crucial before challenging the US-led global hierarchy, because like you said, every country has a different take on it, on how they view BRICS. Let's say, for instance, India and China, they grapple with a tense border standoff, while Brazil, India, and South Africa, they would seek warm relations with both the West and the member states. So I do think that remains a challenge that has yet to be overcome for the group to sort of realize its effectiveness, and how that narrative unfolds, we're yet to see that. This brings us to the end of the discussion. We hope to bring you new developments on this soon. Thank you, Nauraiz, for your expertise, and for everyone for joining us today.